Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Today, I am joined by the amazing Eric Gilde. Eric, how you doing today, man?
I'm great, buddy. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Oh, dude, it's an honor for me. We have a lot in common. A little bit about Eric before we get into that, though. He is an actor and writer based in New York City. He's worked as an actor in theaters all over the country, and his play, The Goodbye Room, was produced by Happy Few Theater Company. But not only theater, you do work behind the camera as well. He appears in the upcoming horror films Veral and Cupid. And not only that, but podcasting, something you love very much as well. Your baseball movie podcast, Take Me Into the Ball Game. So we got a little bit to dissect here before we get to the reason why we're here.
Yeah.
How long have you been acting in theater acting?
I started acting in plays my sophomore year of high school. And I think it actually wasn't until I had graduated college that I was like, oh no, I think I want to pursue this. I think I knew earlier than that, but that was sort of when I admitted it to myself.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where a lot of people do start in theater and then they move their way to the screen. So was that like a natural transition for you, or was it because obviously working in theater and working on screen, while they are similar, they're two completely different animals. You don't get to do a couple
Yeah.
different takes when you're on the stage. So was that a natural transition, or was it something that took a little bit of getting used to going behind the screen?
A little bit of both. Honestly, I think that there are more similarities to the acting of it than there are to the auditioning for it.
Sure.
And so I think that for a long time I felt very confident in my skills, but then at a certain point kind of had to like swallow my pride and realize that like I actually had a lot to learn that was specifically going to, I mean, in general, make me a better performer and especially on camera, but also the sort of thing that could like address issues that specifically come up in an audition setting in terms of like, because it's just a different way of telling a story.
Mhm.
And when you're in an audition for a play, you can move around the room. There's like a physical relationship that's different. And with an on-camera audition, you've got like a static frame that you're supposed to still help tell the story in. So you're supposed to convey this thing happening over here and like this thing happening over here and like there's a dog on the ground or whatever. There's probably not a dog, but you understand. And so
Won't
it's
tell
just like,
anybody if you don't.
yeah, so it's just like technically different. And I think that I didn't quite realize that until I really sort of like admitted that my on-camera auditions were not looking as good as I wanted them to.
Right, and the good thing is, at least you learned from it. There's a lot of people that I'm not
100%.
the problem, everyone else is. At least you took this
Yeah.
as a learning experience to better yourself in the field.
I tried. Yeah, and it's yielded some good results, so I'm very happy.
And people that are repeat visitors to this show probably know how big of a baseball fan I am. It's borderline an obsession for me as well. And you are part of the Take Me Into the Ball Game podcast. Now, how did that get started, and how long have you been a baseball fan?
I've been a baseball fan for most of my life. I think I've been a pretty intense one for probably about 6 or 7 years now. And my wife is also a big baseball fan, way bigger than I will ever be, probably. And we were at the early days of the pandemic thinking about how there might not be a baseball season, but how maybe that's a good idea because of, the pandemic, and really just going back and forth, but still feeling very sad that we didn't have this thing to look forward to. We were watching some baseball movies and it just kind of popped up like this would be a good idea for a podcast. And we weren't doing anything at the time. So it felt like an interesting thing to kind of like figure out as people who have acting experience, but don't really have like podcast producing experience. And so we did a lot of like trial and error, and we've been doing it for 2 years now. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it's usually a lot of fun. Sometimes it's not fun, but those also end up being some of the best episodes because it's
Right.
just like Schadenfreude of us having to talk about like the bench warmers for 2 hours or whatever.
Yeah. Um, and I did have your wife on the show as well. It was a pleasure meeting them. How
Yeah,
are they doing?
very, very well. Busy as always with auditions and drawings and any number of other projects,
Right.
but quite well. Yeah, thanks for asking.
Hey, no problem. I wish them the best. So before we get into this too, I gotta ask. I did not ask your beautiful wife when we talked about it, but
Mhm.
what would you say your favorite baseball movie is?
I favorite is a tricky word because that's very different from best, right? Because if
Yeah.
you were to say best, I would say unflinchingly that I think the best is probably a movie called Sugar that came out in I want to say 2008. Favorite might be Little Big League. I feel like it's a very good, it really toes the line of like a movie that is kind of a family film. It's very much a family film. What am I saying? But it's very smart in the writing and has good acting, so I feel like
Yeah.
it ages well into adulthood. It's the child star that grows up without problems.
Right. And
And
it's funny because watching baseball movies as a kid compared to watching them as an adult. As a kid, I was a huge fan of like The Sandlot, Angels in the Outfield, and I still am. I still love these
sure.
movies. Little Big League, Rookie of the
Oh, they're
Year.
great.
But as an adult, like I liked Trouble with the Curve. I thought that was a great movie. I
Interesting. We haven't done that one yet,
Ooh, have you
but
watched it yet?
I have not.
Please
And
text me after you do it. Let me know what you think.
I will. I have not heard great things. If I'm just going to put my cards out
Mhm.
on there on the table. I've not heard, I'm very happy that you like it.
Yeah, see, I like it, but like I love Moneyball. I love 42. Like those are movies
Oh,
that
yeah.
are just so amazing. And I think those are movies that will always stand the test of time. And it's funny because you go from a movie like Moneyball, which is all about what does he do? He gets on base. There you go. To really watching what a hitter, watching him try to develop and he can't hit a curveball, and how a scout can hear that, so like
Absolutely.
and that's what I love about baseball is you can have the analytic side of things, but you also have to have that human element to it. Computers can't
Totally.
tell you every single piece, but holy shit, they can be helpful as hell. That's why I think I love baseball is it's you're learning something new all the time. I love taking my scorecard out to the game, keeping score. Like you could be involved in the
It's
game
really
just as
fun to
much as
keep score.
anything. It is,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
no. It's really nice and kind of, I don't know, very meditative
It
because
is.
it's something that doesn't require a lot of speed, but does require constant attention. It's
Mhm.
something that lets you focus on the game and sort of like get into the flow of what's happening. I hadn't done it for a really long time, and I didn't do it quite so much last year because I was just so excited to be back in parks.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy scoring a game a
Mhm.
lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot of fun, and it appeals to the sort of old timey side of both myself and Ellen. We sort of enjoy that kind of thing too.
Mhm.
And I also love how we've had a couple of opportunities with our podcast to find things that are either horror or horror adjacent. There's not a ton that fits that category, so it's involved a little bit of spacing it out, but like we did an episode on a Twilight Zone episode called The Mighty Casey that was
Mhm.
really fun. There's a very interesting sort of zombie movie called The Battery that doesn't really have much baseball in it, but the two characters that it follows for the majority of the film are a pitcher and a catcher. Um,
Nice.
it's very interesting. It's almost like not even a horror movie. It's sort of like an indie buddy film that just happens to take place in the zombie apocalypse. And I was into it. Yeah, it was
What
very
a
cool.
perfect name for that movie. If you're talking about a pitcher and catcher, to just name it The Battery. That's perfect.
Yeah, it's good. And there are a couple of others that we're hoping to get to, but just trying to like
Right.
space them out.
Well, let's hope we get a season this year because we know how that's looking, and maybe by the time this episode airs, we'll have some good news. But
Hope
God, I just
so.
want to hear the crack of that bat, man.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there'll be minor league ball in,
Right.
a little over a month regardless. So that's something, I
I'll
guess.
be I'll be taking my trips to Toledo, man. I'll be watching Riley Green and
Oh.
Spencer Torkelson tee off, so I'm happy with that. Um,
Oh. Yeah, he's very good.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
The
Um,
Tigers, they're gonna maybe get pretty good pretty soon.
as long as the people we're developing in the minors, there's a whole lot of busting that happens, but as long as the development keeps going the way that it's going and they can become successful big league players, I like our chances here in the next couple of years with our pitching. We got the young pitching of Casey Mize, Tarek Skubal, Spencer Turnbull, still a young guy, just had Tommy John, but he's still a young guy. And then like, you've
Yeah,
got the Riley Green, the Spencer Torkelson, Jackson Jobe, who they got in the draft this year, young pitcher. I think they can really
yeah.
be successful in a couple of years if they keep
I'm
developing the way they have been.
I'm really excited to watch what happens with that team. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited to watch what happens to them every year anyway. Well, Eric, this has been amazing to talk about baseball, but my friend, I want to talk about another passion of ours. I want to talk about some
Yeah.
horror movies, and horror
Okay.
has to start for us somewhere, Eric. So I want to go back to the past here for a minute, talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie, and the first horror movie you watched was.
Well, The Gate is probably the earliest one that I really think of as, I guess, like as the whole film, if that makes sense. Like as someone who grew up in the 80s and probably started watching genre stuff like significantly earlier than I probably should have. I have a lot of like flash memories of like
Sure.
this moment in this thing, like Jason, or like all of the big characters and some of the gorier scenes. But when I think about sort of like a full story, the first thing that pops to mind is The Gate. And it was really, really fun to like think about that and revisit it, because I feel like I see so many formative things about me within like the world of that. These
Mm-hmm.
like he's this kid like riding his bike with his baseball cap, and it's a movie where like two kids use like model rockets and like metal music to like stop a demonic invasion. And also there's geodes and like, I mean, it just seems like such a like little boy in the 80s movie.
Oh, dude, totally. And one of my favorite cover arts of all time, Pray It's Not Too Late. This is
So
easily
good.
one of my favorite cover arts of all time.
Yeah.
And this is a movie that I have talked about very often that this is the marijuana of horror movies. It's the perfect gateway drug for young kids to get into horror movies. Like to me, this is the perfect one to do that. I talk about The Gate, and then I talk about Monster Squad. I feel like is another one that
Oh,
if you want that perfect movie to show your young child
love
to
it.
get them into horror, that's a little bit pushing the boundaries. There's a lot of real scary moments in The Gate. And do you remember who you were with the first time you had watched The Gate?
My guess is that I was either with my brother Joe. I've got a big brother he's a little under 2 years older than me. And sort of through that little age gap and the gap that we had with an older cousin, Paul, it was a total like older cousin situation. Paul might have been involved as well. But I think it was just, either at home or at my grandparents or some relatives watching it, on a little like 15 or 19-inch TV with a VCR on top in somebody's basement. And like, and it freaked me out. And honestly, there are parts that I think are still pretty freaky, despite the fact
Dude,
that it has creepy moments, but it's not really gory. There are a
right.
couple of exceptions to that, but like it's nonetheless got a lot of things that I think especially are frightening for a young viewer, right? Like you've got the creepiness of like being a kid, like alone in your house, and like the quiet of that that's at the beginning of that. You've got like sounds in the night. You've got like your dog dying. You've got like the the moment where like the minions are pretending to be the parents, and so the anger of the parents at you is a thing. It's got literal like something's under the bed moments, and like it's got going into a dark basement. I mean, I feel like it's got all of these like little
Horror
kid,
tropes for kids.
like yeah, all of the things that like for me at least as a little kid like kept me like just at eye level beyond the covers, and just like feeling like I needed to be like really, really still in my bedroom because like, you know, what if something's in here and it notices me or something? Like, yeah.
Right.
And this movie did a really good job of creating and developing like those psychoses that I just described.
Well, and another good thing, like one scene I want to talk about real quick that you just brought up, and I feel like this scene for a lot of kids was so terrifying. You know, when you got your dad back, you're safe now. Your dad's here, you know, and then you've been bad. You start strangling him until, you know, he pokes his own dad's eyes out and the goo comes out.
Which is so gross.
Yes, dude. But like at this moment, as kids were watching, you're like, oh, he's safe now. Dad's here. You know, my hero, my protector, my parents are here. Only for that to happen. So I love how you're describing this, because I feel like that's exactly how it is. These are things in the movie that as children we're scared of. Things under our bed, our parents being angry at us, you know, a scary basement. These are things that were really, really scary for us.
And not for nothing, but I think that that moment where, you know, fake dad's head melts and caves in and all the green goo comes out is probably like one of the two or three, I would argue maybe the grossest like image in the film, at least looking at it now. I feel like it's gross enough that I suspect the reason that it's green goo is because if they had gone red, it would no longer have had a PG-13 rating.
Total R rating if it was red.
Yeah. And it's funny. Have you seen The Gate 2?
I have, and
it's not very good. It's interesting, but it's
yeah. That's what I say. It's not bad, but it's not The Gate.
Right. It's a little more of like a weird like wish fulfillment thing. But both that one and this one that we're talking about today, it's funny how there's also just this like little like my first body horror like thing also with the head stuff with the eye in the hand. That is gnarly. And when possessed, turned over to the dark side, maybe sacrificed, Terry is in the closet, and the way that Al gets rid of him is to stab him in the eye with the leg of a Barbie doll. Like, that is cringy to me even now.
Yeah, man. And it's funny because we just talked about a whole lot of scenes that are so impactful in this film. But of the ones, what would you say from every scene in the film, which one affected you the most?
Honestly, I think it's a completely different scene from what we've talked about, but this is like how the movie is just like ingrained in me. I think, first of all, almost anything Minion related. But if I were to pinpoint a specific moment, it would be where Terry falls down the hole, and there's just like, I mean, it just kind of looks like a little like tunnel system, like the minions had sort of burrowed their way up, and him in that hole with like nothing else there but little dark dirt corridors and the minions sort of like coming up on him is something that I continue to think about from time to time as a really terrifying image. I think to the extent that I was young enough when I saw this that I think for a long time that image kind of became a placeholder for me when I thought of like what hell was like,
Sure.
is sort of like dark tunnels with these little creatures with sharp fangs and dead eyes like roaming around them. And so I think that, yeah, it was very haunting for me as a kid. And even now, I think that that creature design is just kind of unmatched for its like efficacy and like impact on both young and old me.
So good, dude. And I love the fact that they use a lot of claymation. I love the fact that there's a lot of practical effects. That's something I'm a big fan of in this movie.
Yeah, a lot of
Um,
like forced perspective stuff and
yeah.
like playing with the frame rate of the camera. I think some of the minion stuff they like shot at half speed so that like when they played it back it would like have just like a slightly different feel to it. It's yeah, really really cool.
Oh yeah. It's so rad to look at today. So we know, Eric, which scene affected you the most, but what
Uh,
would you say your favorite scene from the gate is?
wow. I think that one of my favorite like images. I'm stalling a little bit while I do a Rolodex of scenes, but I think that when the fake zombie guy that Terry had like made up a story that there was a dead person that was in the wall of the main kid. Oh gosh, Stephen Dorff's
Yeah, Stephen Dorff.
his character's house, and it turned out he made it up. But these these darn minions, they preyed on that fear and they sort of like made up this imagined guy. And when he falls and it just splits up into all of the little minions running around, that is a super cool moment that I still think looks awesome, but
Yeah.
I also feel like did a lot for my imagination watching it then, and that I still think is really cool now. I also love that initial entrance of the demon lord. I
Mhm.
think it's very very cool, like super theatrical. I love that it's kind of one shot that kind of sits for a little while and you see all the little minions like come out of the hole and they're kind of like waiting around, and then you start to see some movement with the excitement of it, and then the demon lord pops up. It's just like it's such a killer entrance.
Mhm. And
What
it's
about
funny.
you?
Oh, I always and forever glass in the hand. That to me, like I just as a kid, like I just even as a kid, I was like, man, that took some balls. Like
It's still
to do that, man.
it still makes me squirm. It does what happens to me sometimes when I go see horror films, especially like gruesome ones with a group of close friends, and thankfully they are delighted and not annoyed by the fact that as much I'm a huge horror fan. I love it. I sometimes am a little squirmy, and my response to being nervous or uncomfortable is to giggle. And so there are times watching like really intense like moments in really intense films, and I'm like hugging myself giggling, and there are so many times where people are like, what is that guy's problem?
Well, see, I'm with, and even though I hate the term gore porn, that's not
Mhm.
my thing, dude. I'm not like one of those people like, oh, the gorier the better. I'm with you
Yeah.
100%. My wife, huge gore porn fan. Like, the gorier the better for her. And I'm like, God, you scare me. But it's just like I get what you're saying. You don't have to be super gory to scare me.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I think it's fine, and it's like most other things, in my opinion. If it's done really well, and if it's
Mhm.
done sort of within a good story where we care about what's happening and who the characters are, and there are arcs and all of that sort of stuff, if that's all in place and it's done well, I think it's awesome. I think it's just a very easy trick that
Yeah.
you can still get something back even if you do it poorly. And so there's a lot of like splattery jump scare movies that aren't very good because they're kind of like cheap and easy thrills,
Right.
comparatively speaking.
No,
Yeah.
and I completely agree with you. Scare me with your story. That's how I've always been my whole life. So now
Yeah.
The Gate is one of the movies, like I said, that's meant a lot to me as a kid. Growing up, I remember having this on VHS. It's just a movie that I love so much. Now, I always ask this question when we're getting towards the end of the episode. Today, would you like to see The Gate remade?
I that's a good question, and I think I would be fine with it. I don't know if I would like to see a remake or if I'd like to see another story about the gate. I do love it and I want more of it, but having seen the gate 2 or the gate colon trespassers, I think is what it's called,
Yeah.
that expands on the mythology of the gate and the world, and it's one of those things that I think doesn't really work. And I think it had a little bit more of a budget, or they were trying something different, so a lot of the underworld stuff that they have in that and some of the demon stuff that they have in that is not as good. And I don't know if it's worth exploring, like, let's do a gate movie for adults that is exclusive, like that's just pulls out all the stops with like gore and possession and all of those things. But I feel like you might lose something.
Yeah,
So I think I'm a soft no. I feel like I could be convinced. Like if someone wanted to make it, I would for sure go see it. But
100%.
I think it would have to be. I think it would have to. I don't know, like approach it from like a slightly different angle or something. I feel like there were even plans for another Gate movie at one point, and then they fell through. While while I was doing a little like brush up on this, I did see that there was an Australian horrorcore musician that did a music video for some song. I can't remember what it was called. I feel bad that I can't remember the artist name, but it had Lewis Tripp, who plays Terry. The
Yeah.
music video is like current day Terry, like summoning a spell or whatever, and then it turns out that he's summoning this like rapper.
That's even better.
It's like if you're a completionist, you can watch it. And there's a podcast where they talk about it, and they both seem very, very lovely. But it's not on any of my Spotify playlists. So
That's awesome, man. So, we know how horror started for you with The Gate and how much that movie meant to you. But now I want to go scream on you here for a second, my friend. My little buddy Ghostface has a question for you. What's
okay.
your favorite scary movie, Eric? What
Oh,
is your favorite horror movie of all time?
thank you very much, Ghostface, for the question. I really, it depends on, like, there's a part of me that is like, well, what's the movie that's like freaked me out the most? Or just sort of like what within the genre? Because I also like, I would be very tempted to put Return of the Living Dead on there
Mhm.
for all of its crazy 80s bonkers punk rock, like
Yeah.
gratuitous ridiculousness that is kind of tongue in cheek, but also has a few moments that are like acid burned into my brain.
Mhm.
Or like there are so many good experiences that I've had seeing things in the theater, and some of them are movies that I'm like I really loved Raw, the
Yeah.
French like cannibal film that came out a few years ago, but like I don't know that I need to see it again because it
Mhm.
like kind of messed me up.
Yeah.
So my temptation to go in one or another direction has put me with a genuine choice that I feel like is also a very uncontroversial choice. Probably the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Very fair.
In
Um,
terms of what it does with so little for being like a surprisingly not gory film, just like the atmosphere and the tension, like you can just feel the ickiness of it. And its whole deal of like, I think I read something actually saying this on Twitter earlier in the week that was referencing it as well, that it just has this vibe of like, this is a big country where there's a lot of stuff going on in dark little corners that maybe you'll stumble into sometime. And
right.
it's just like it's so I love it. I love it.
I got my apron right here, man. So I
Oh, nice.
I totally get it. And what I love, something you just said about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's not a blood fest. It's not
Mhm.
a gore fest. It's an artsy film. There's a lot of artsy
Yeah.
shots. The production was amazing. The cinematography is great. The production design, anywhere from getting roadkill to get bones, and like everything is so genuine in that movie. And I think that really plays to how amazing the movie is. So
Yeah.
definitely
And
can't go wrong by choosing Texas Chainsaw.
apparently it was so hot and miserable and gross, like to the point that people were having starting to get like medical problems
Yeah.
during filming. And I feel so bad for everybody involved who had to be subjected to that. But that is evident in the finished product in a way that is like
Yeah.
deeply compelling. And I
And you know
actually,
they're so proud of what they did.
yeah, yeah. And I actually I was looking before we went on for my Leatherface shirt that is just his silhouette with the chainsaw and it says free hugs on it. And I could not find it. So I've decided to go with the baseball, and it is Texas, but the Longview Cannibals
Yeah.
sweatshirt.
That's even better.
Yeah, where baseball and horror overlap. It's not a lot, but it is a non-zero number.
Well, when I die, that's my heaven right there. So, man,
Yeah.
Eric, I've had such a great time hanging out with you, talking baseball, talking horror. But now, my
Thanks.
friend,
Yeah,
we're
it's
at
been a
the end.
blast.
Oh, dude, this is great. So, at the end of the episode, I always ask the same question. We're going to go back to the gate. And what we're going
Mm,
to do here, my friend, is we're going to rank this on a skull count. Now, we're not judging it on production, score, acting, direction. We're not going to be critics right now. What we're doing is strictly judging this movie on how much it affected you on first viewing. So, 0 skulls being not effective, 5 being very effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. What would your skull ranking of the gate be?
I think I'm gonna go a 4.5.
Very
It's
nice.
pretty high up there. I'm not confident that it's the most, because there are others that like I want to give myself a little bit of room.
Sure.
And there was a part of me that was tempted to talk about Pet Cemetery, except it was so like obviously not my first to me that it felt like cheating. And
Sure.
so the gate was closer to my heart. But like there are a couple up there that I'm like, they might have a bigger imprint in some ways, but this is like right there.
Right. And I can't blame you, man. And The Gate is one of those movies that I love. I've showed it to my kids, and it's something that it'll be with me forever. So I didn't say this
Yeah.
at the beginning, but I'm going to say it now, guys. We're at the third act now. The credits are about to roll. All Eric's social media links and podcast link is all down here in the
Ooh.
description. So make sure you're following him on social media. Make sure you're checking out the podcast. You should have already done that if you've been paying attention to my last episodes, but make sure
Yeah.
you guys are checking them out. We appreciate you doing it. And he's got a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline. So the only way to keep up to date on it is following on social media. So, Eric, don't go anywhere, man. I got a couple more questions for you.
Sure.
Everybody else, as always, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.